So it used to be that the dollar didn't exist. The United States actually existed, as we all know, it's 1776. But actually, the dollar wasn't around back then. And the way that you bartered with someone, well, you would just sort of trade goods. You'd barter with them, or you would actually trade banknotes. So banks would come into existence. They'd issue their own currency, and what you traded for someone else would kind of depend on the trustworthiness of that bank. The value of that currency, whether it had any value at all, depended on the financial security of that bank. And as you could imagine, this became kind of problematic as banks sort of just had the incentive to create more and more of their own money to grow their own business. And so that led to bank runs and a number of financial problems. And only in 1792, some decades later, was the US dollar first established. And actually, the dollar was backed by the Spanish silver dollar. It was linked in a fixed ratio to the Spanish silver dollar at the time. All this is trivia. I don't expect you to remember it, other than kind of it's a segue into what happened in the more modern era for a number of years, called something called the gold standard. And so let me give you a problem that you might encounter that's kind of linked to this, is that in the early 1920s, the gold standard was still in existence. After World War II, everything kind of broke down, and during those war years as well. But in the 1920s, at least, it was still the case that the US dollar was actually tied or fixed to an ounce of gold. So, no matter where you were, you knew that the US dollar, X number of dollars was equal to a certain amount of gold. And it wasn't just the US dollar, but many of the major currencies out there were also tied to specific amounts of gold. And so the French franc, which no longer exists, by the way, now France uses the euro, which was introduced in, I think, 1999. But at that time, the 1920s, the French franc, one was worth 413. 1 ounce of gold was worth 413 French francs. So that was kind of the ratio. And so if you wanted to figure out the exchange rate between one country and another, it was actually fairly easy to do because exchange rates were fixed. It's just that they were all, at least the major currencies, fixed to a specific amount of gold. And so to figure out the foreign exchange rate of, in this case, the dollar versus the franc, I'm going to call it FF, you would take the rate of exchange of the dollar to the ounce of gold that, it's measured against, and divide that by the rate of exchange of the French franc to an ounce of gold. And since they're kind of linked to the same thing, then, this all simplifies, and we're essentially just taking 20.72 and divided by 413. And so the rate of the US dollar to the French franc at the time could be quickly found by comparing the two currencies' prices relative to the same amount of gold. And So my question as an add-on to you is, if this is the rate of 1 French franc versus the US dollar, what is the rate of 1 US dollar to the French franc? And the answer is to take 1 divided by that number that we've already calculated, the opposite exchange rate, the US dollar per 1 franc, take that number and divide 1 into that. And that gives us 19.92 French francs for every 1 US dollar.